Hello everyone, and welcome to the official Roblu tutorial for forms. In this video, I'm going to learn you guys on how to set up custom forms for Roblu. And what custom forms are is they're really, it's kind of one of the most powerful features of Roblu. It is a kind of the core functionality, you get the idea. And what forms allow you to do is you can define what metrics you'd like to collect for scouting. So here I kind of have an example event set up, and you can see here that you have a pit tab, a predictions tab, and you have all the matches that team rushes in. And you can see here that there's a form here, and you have each one of these items here is called a metric, right? And for each metric, you can kind of specify, what do you want to name it, what value do you want it to collect. You actually have access to two different forms, right? So you can specify a pit form, and you can specify a match form, which is used for predictions and matches. And so you can just kind of get the feel for how these forms work. And there's a lot of different metrics that you can use. So you don't have to use all of them. You can use different combinations. And I'll show you how that works in a second. And so one of the cool things about forms is that Roblu actually, you specify the metric forms, and what Roblu will do is it'll generate analytics for you. So for example, in this case, I specified a custom metric, cubes in scale. And here I'm getting a graph, and if I wasn't using this side sync thing, if you're in the app, you can actually zoom and pinch and pan around on this graph. It'll show you the average value. It'll show you the breakdown values. So Roblu will generate graphs for the metric values that you have, and the overview tab kind of gives you a snapshot of what a team looks like. You can sort by metrics, right? I can sort by any of the metrics that I've defined. So I can sort by cubes and switch, and I'll get some, average, min, and max statistics, as well as just the raw data output for this team's for each team's matches. And it's sorted by the average, right? So warp speed has the best average for metric, cubes, and switch. Another cool thing that Roblu will do is you can actually export your forms directly to CSV, which is really cool, right? So you have 6 different sheets that you can generate. So here is just the generic match data output, right? You get the match number, you get the metric titles across the top here, and then you just get their values inputted into here. You have access to pit data and predictions data in a separate sheet. You can get a match list of all the matches in the event and which teams are on there and which alliance they're on. You get this cool match lookup feature, right? So you can actually enter in a match number here, and it'll pull the 6 teams and all their metric data for that match, right, and for each team. You've got R matches, which will generate and show you which teams, which matches you're in, and you can also import or export field data, which is what the Blue Alliance records. So with forms, you really have a lot of different options for how you can kind of set things up. And so without further ado, let me get into how to set up a form. So before I get into anything specific, I'd like to talk about the master form. So the edit master form actually does not get synced across multiple devices, if you were wondering. But what the master form is that likely your team will only really need to set up a form once for the whole year, and you kind of want to, you'll want to use this for multiple events and maybe tweak it here and there, but you'll be using the same general form. So editing the master form is there we go. Yeah, if editing the master form, essentially, this is kind of where you want to set up your form, right? You want to set up the master form here, and this kind of gives you access to, right now, I guess I'll show you how this works, right? When you're creating an event, it's event day. You go and select your event, downloads your event, and when you get to the form type, you can just go ahead and use master form, which is really cool. And if you've already set up a form in a specific event, that's fine. You can actually just go to Edit Master Form. You can go down, or you can click this Import button at the top here and go ahead and click, select your event, and go ahead and click Import Form from Event, and you'll get the master form will populate with all the metrics from one of the events that you specified it in. And you can go ahead and save it with this checkmark button. So you only have to specify the master form once, and then when you're setting up events, like I said, you can just select the Use Master Form. And keep in mind, you can always edit forms, right? The changes, when you first create your form, all the metrics that you have, are not set in stone. You can edit the form whenever you need to, even in the middle of an event. And the form is actually synced in real time across all devices. You can also create a custom form right from the get-go for a specific event. You can use a template form, which is this is just a curated list of teams that have sent me their way of scouting, right? And you can actually enable preview mode here, and you can select these and just kind of see what these, see what these templates look like, right? And if your team has one that you want listed here, go ahead and send it to me, and I'll go ahead and add it. And then you have a fourth option here to use no form, which I don't really know why anyone would use that, but it's there. So let's get into the form editor. So the form editor is shared, is shared across all these different import methods. And the form editor is kind of the bread and butter of how you create, modify, edit, etc. for forms. So when I open up Edit Master Form here, this is what is called the form editor. So I'll just go through and explain all the different UI elements, right? So you have this option here, and this only shows up when you're editing the master form. And this is if you want to import metrics from an event. You have the preview button where you can go ahead and preview what the form will look like when it's imported, or when people are scouting. You click the check button to save changes. So if you really mess something up, you can go ahead and just press the back button here, and it'll discard any changes you were working on. Below that, you have this kind of toggle right here, and this is to switch between, Roblu allows two different forms, right? The pit form and the match form. So you can switch between which one you're editing, and this is just kind of a great way to separate out different metrics that you want to store. There's three gestures you need to get down. So you can actually hold on a metric and drag it up or down to reorder it. You can hold on a metric and swipe to the right to edit that metric. And you can hold on a metric and swipe to the left to delete that metric. If that metric has scouting data filled out somewhere, you will receive a warning before clearing that metric. So those are the three basic gestures in the form editor. When you want to add a metric, you want to go ahead and click this plus button right here, and you'll be brought to the second most important view in here, and this is the add metric view. So this has three major components. First off, you have the same discard and save buttons as before. In the toolbar at the top here, you'll receive a metric preview. Now this actually does have some functionality. Whatever value you select here will be the default value for every metric, the first time it's created. So if I create this Boolean with with this checked as yes, every single match that this Boolean appears in, it will default to yes. So whatever value, this applies to all metrics. You can set a default value that metric will, auto set to. Below that, you have the metric type selector, and this gives you 11 different selections of metrics that you can use. A metric is essentially just it defines a certain way of collecting data. And below metric type, you will receive configuration fields for specifying attributes of that metric. So for example, I can change the title, and you'll see it's changing in real time up here. And this just allows you to specify, like I said, metric attributes here. So the Boolean allows you to store yes or no value. The counter allows you to store a numerical value, and it also has two different toggles, right? You can have either the plus and minus option, or you can have verbose input, right, where you can type the value in without having to use the plus button. There is the slider metric, which allows a minimum and maximum values, and this just allows you to slide it back and forth. Title works just the same for all of them. You have the chooser metric, which allows you to select a metric from to select one item from a list of options. Keep in mind that the chooser metric does not allow duplicates. So if I try to add a duplicate here, it'll only, never mind, the chooser does allow duplicates. So I think I'm thinking of Checkbox. But yeah, you just specify your list here, 1, 2, whatever, and you can set the default value as you wish. The checkbox metric is a very powerful metric, and this is the one that doesn't allow duplicates. But as you can see here, you can add metrics, and check each one individually. So that's a very powerful metric. There's the stopwatch metric, which allows you to run a stopwatch. You can reset it to 0. You can add a lap with the lap button, which doesn't work in add metric mode. There's a text field, which is just a comments, whatnot. And keep in mind, this will recognize default values as well. So you can set up, kind of headers here, comments, suggestions, whatever, and it'll default to this on every text field. Let's see here. Gallery allows you to store pictures taken from your phone. I am going to warn you about using the gallery metric. So if you have older phones that you're using for scouting, or kind of, cheaper phones, sometimes cheaper phones don't have enough memory to store a whole lot of pictures in memory from nicer phones that take, some of the newer phones take really nice pictures, which take up a lot of memory. Again, this is going to increase how much, the data sync that needs to occur, right? So if you have a lot of high-res pictures stored in here, it's going to use a lot more syncing as you're syncing your event. So just keep that in mind. But otherwise, it's a great feature. You can take pictures, draw on them, all sorts of cool stuff like that. Next is the divider metric, and this doesn't actually store value. It just allows you to separate metrics logically, right? To kind of categorize them. Next, you have the field metric, which allows you just to draw on a field diagram, and you can just doodle on it however you want. Next is the custom calculation metric, and this metric needs a little bit more explaining. So the custom calculation metric allows you to define your own calculation based off other metrics within a certain match. So for example, you'll see back here that I defined all these metrics that, that my team wants to record, right? So I can actually go ahead to the calculation metric. You have the title here as usual, and then you have the calculation attribute right here. And here you can type in a mathematical equation for the value in the function, right? And it supports, well, first off, here's the 4 basic operators you can use. It supports, the sine function, cosine function. You can use mathematical constants like that. So it's a pretty full-fledged equation field. So when you want to set up an equation, you can, it works just kind of like a calculator, right? You type in the value that you want to use. You can use parentheses and whatnot. And if you want to reference a metric value, you just have to type in that metric's title exactly. Now, so you don't have to go back and forth and kind of keep this in mind. You can actually click the add metric here, and you can select from a list of your compatible metrics, for example, cubes and scale, and you can do nested calculations as well, right? So one calculation can refer to another calculation. So you can do climb time, for example, and I could, if I wanted, I could make this metric get the average of 2 metrics, right? So I could do, this metric, right? And then divide it by 2. Now, keep in mind, any white space in here doesn't matter, right? The equation thing will just ignore it, so you don't worry about trying to get this, all lined up correctly. All white space is ignored. So just keep that in mind. The only white space that is important is white space occurring within a metric title. So keep that in mind. And lastly, you have the field data metric. And what the field data metric will do is, let me just call this up on my computer. Sorry, this is going to be a bit longer of a video just because there's a lot to, there's a lot to think about here. But what the field metric will do is it's actually, you can't edit it, but it'll just, for example, here's a qualification metric here. The field data is just going to automatically embed all this scouting information right here. So it's pretty straightforward. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, I shouldn't have deleted that. Let me just go ahead and set up, we'll just do cubes and switch times 5 and add, we don't need that. We'll add the calculation. And I'll try to get one of each metric just so you can kind of see how it works in the end here. And I think we need a text field. Yeah, so we'll just get a list of metrics here. Yeah, that should be fine for now. I don't know if I added field. Did I add field data? I didn't. Okay. Yeah, so like I said, you can remember those 3 different gestures for kind of organizing things. And like I said, you can preview the form right here. Now there's a couple more technical things that I should explain here. First off, let's say that you created a Boolean value called auto initiated, and you set the default value to false. So before I explain this, I should back up a little bit. And each metric has an underlining attribute, which is called the observed attribute. So this all the observed attribute does, and you'll see this in a second, is it stores whether or not the metric has been observed by a scouter. So if a scouter makes a change to a metric, the observed tag will become true, right? So this is kind of a crucial feature for several different things. So it determines if the CSV export, the analytics, whatnot, it determines if a value should be included in that. So only observed metrics are included in analytics. So you only are seeing data that people have actually seen and entered into the app. The second use for it is it allows you to change default values for metrics. So let's say you set up the form with auto-initiated, you set the default value to false, and you realize, oh crap, like this needs to be default value of true. So you can go ahead and hold on this metric. It's hard to do this with a mouse. Hold on this metric, swipe to the right, and you can actually change the default value. Now this will actually go through every match form and override the default value and set it to true. But if that metric is observed, it will just keep whatever value it had while it was observed. So you can change the default value for metrics, but it won't override your scouting data. So that's basically how the form works. When you're ready to go, you can go ahead and hit the check button. We will just go ahead. We'll delete this event since we don't need it. Before we set up an event, if you head into settings, I would highly recommend backing up the master form. This just means if an app update comes and something accidentally gets overridden or deleted, you'll always have a copy of your master form that you spent so much time on. So back up your master form. You can always re-import it with the import option. And this is cross-version compatible. All right, so let's go ahead and create an event right here. Create event, import. We'll go 2017. If you're testing, I would recommend using a event from the previous year, just because they contain that match list, which, events that haven't occurred yet, or, sometimes they don't contain up-to-date information. If you want to, you can also randomize scouting data if you want to test it, but we're not gonna do that. So we'll use the master form. We'll hit check, and it'll download the information from the Blue Alliance. And it'll load real quick, and we can go ahead and tap on a team, and our form that we just edited will show up here. So let's go to quals 3, for example. So we'll see all our metrics that we defined. You'll see the match data, which is importing from the Blue Alliance. Our custom calculation is cubes and switch. So I think you can actually modify this metric, right? It'll multiply this by 5. So you'll see that the metric, it updates the instant you change values. And if I can select a couple of these, right? And again, you'll see that metrics are generated automatically for you. And you'll see that, this team contains a lot of matches, but only 2 of them are appearing on the graphs. And that's because these are the only 2 whose observed attribute is set to true. Now you probably noticed that underneath each metric here, you have the not observed tag, right? The not observed yet tag. So this just says that this metric shouldn't be included and considered as it shouldn't be considered as real data. It goes away the instant you make a change, right? So I can make a change and it'll go away. But let's say that cubes in exchange 0 is the correct value. You can go ahead and just click on the not observed yet tag, and it will disappear and save. Keep in mind that the instant you make changes to a form, it will save them. And then again, when you're scouting, and I'd recommend watching the Roblu Cloud syncing tutorial after this, and that'll show you kind of how your forms distribute to scouters. And so that's the essence of the custom forms system. If you open up an event and go to settings, you can actually hit edit form, and you can make real-time changes to that form. So for example, I could add the cubes and switch, move that to the top. I could delete a metric here. And let's just, add a new metric, my new metric, right? So add a new metric at the bottom here. As soon as you click that check button, if you're syncing, your form will be synced to every device. So like I said, you can change the form at any point in time. So you'll notice here that I moved the metric. It still maintained the value that I had scouted earlier. So that works just fine. You'll see the metric is appearing up here, and new metrics are appearing at the bottom. So it's a really cool system of kind of how the metric, how you can collect metrics and analyze them and whatnot. You know, like I said, you can go into custom sorting and sort by any of the metrics that we just set up. So that's how the custom form system works. By the way, n.o. stands for not observed. But as far as that goes, I think that gives you a pretty good understanding of how custom forms work in Roblu. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and leave them in the description, and I will see you guys in the next tutorial video.